Good morning, friends, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. It was quite funny. Just a few moments ago, Asha was teaching a class here for the Indian continent in this very same seat just 7 minutes ago or so, and she encouraged people to come watch. So if you're one of those people, thank you for joining, and it will be lovely to share the time together. And today we'll be examining a really wonderful piece of Swami Kriyananda's music, one that's perhaps a common favorite within Ananda, and it is In the Spirit from the Oratorio. And before we jump in together, let's begin with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, dearest friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Nahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, my friend Swami Kriyananda, we bow humbly before you all. Steal into our hearts today. Help us to feel the presence of your love. Help us to know, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that you exist and that you care for us. Teach us through our inner experience to come into direct contact with your eternal wisdom. Transform us until all parts of our lives, all parts of our heart, all parts of our mind reflect thee. Om. Peace. Amen. I'm overcome already just thinking in preparation of this piece of music. It's very moving to me, as you can see. And it's particularly so because I was just having a conversation with a friend as to how God cannot be proved. And I began thinking on that line that of course he can be proved, but he can't be proved by the instruments of a material scientist. And as Yogananda said, it's because the instruments that scientist uses are not refined enough to detect his presence, God's presence. But I began to think, there's so much in life that cannot be proved by any material instrument. Can you prove that your mother loves you? Can you prove that you love your beloved? Can you prove that you love your child? And just in the way that someone who doubts God can cut apart the rationalization of the presence of the divine, so too could a doubter cut apart any human relationship. And you may think that is quite a bit of a jump, but it's actually not. This is the stuff of many writings. This is the stuff of the play of Othello that Shakespeare wrote about, where Othello loved his wife and she loved him deeply, but then by the introduction of insidious doubt, he began to wonder, perhaps she doesn't love me after all. Because love cannot be proved. You could say to yourself, oh, I know she loves me because of the way she smiles at me. But then doubt would whisper to you, but maybe she's doing that to manipulate you. Maybe she's doing that to try and make you think that she's not in love with someone else. And that's exactly what happens in the play Othello. Othello whispers poison, Iago whispers poison into the main character's ear until he convinces him that the very thing that he knew was real is not. And that's what doubt does. Doubt can destroy anything that you know if you give it enough time. Doubt is like a cancer. Doubt is like rust on iron, on steel that will eat it away at its core. And how do we combat that? Because as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the doubter is the most miserable of mortals. And that was, my heart leapt out when I was talking with my friend about that God could not be proved, because I could feel the misery of that statement and the hopelessness and the fear that comes with that. And interestingly, in my heart, of course, I feel God can be proved. God can be experienced, but it's not by a seismograph. It's not by anything that we can build with our hands, but it's by the sensitive attunement of the heart. It's by calming the feeling nature and going inside. And that's exactly what this song is about, in the spirit. It's about having that divine contact, that from that point onward you never doubt again that you know that He exists and that He loves you. And every saint who has ever found God exclaims the same things. As one of the great saints of France said, if you only knew how much God loved you, you would die for joy. And as Swami Kriyananda often put it, no saint ever achieves God contact and then comes back to say, it was all a scam, turn around, go back, just engage yourself in worldly pursuits, it's not worth it. None of them have ever said that. In fact, they all come back saying, it was worth everything. It's worth everything. How can that be? Because of the ecstasy of God contact. And that's what this song is all about. This is in the spirit, which is, like I mentioned, from the oratorio, which is the life of Jesus as expressed through music. And this, if I remember correctly, is sort of an anachronism in the normal flow of the oratorio, that I believe this song is inspired from the Apostle John and the book of John, which is a deep mystical book of Revelation, and that after Jesus was crucified, if I understand correctly, and I'm a little bit spotty on my history, so forgive me if I'm incorrect here, but I believe John went into deep seclusion for many years, and there he experienced Christ as an infinite consciousness. And then, as the lyrics say, there he showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking him should know. And so the book of John in the Bible is filled with mystical truths and revelations. He talks about the 7 candlesticks being lit. He talks about the roar of the 7 trumpets. And these are the mystical truths of having an inner divine awakening. Truths which all seeking him should know. Because we cannot find freedom through any outward act, but we find freedom through the inner awakening of our true soul nature. That, as it says in a moment, how the soul, made to live in freedom, can reclaim its eternal right. So let's tune in for a moment into that great disciple of Christ and into his experience of, through attunement and through the sacrifice of his own guru and through his deep inner sadhana, his inner attunement to his guru, through his meditative practices, he is coming into direct contact with the consciousness of God, where all doubt bursts into flames of joy. So let's sing together. I was caught up in ecstasy. 'Twas a day sanctified by God. There he showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking him should know. How the soul, made to live live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right. How the night born of our delusions can be fired blazing with his light. Oh, Immortal Promise. It's easy to see why this is a favorite song of so many devotees at Ananda, isn't it? It's such a simple melody, such a simple song, and yet it does so much. I could barely get through it this time. But it's so sincere. It's so real, isn't it? It just makes you come that much closer to that memory of divine contact. And let's remember that Swami Kriyananda's music is not just entertainment. It's no idle fancy, but it's really a method of transforming our consciousness. It's like a ray, or like if you are a Star Wars or a Star Trek fan, it's like a tractor beam of divine grace, that if you tune into this music, it can lift you into that ray of consciousness that it represents. And it can work in direct antidote to certain negative qualities or to certain despairs. And actually Swami partnered some of his music to specific antidotes for negative emotions, like singing "Have You Seen Sorrento" to overcome cynicism or criticism of others, which is just wonderful. And I actually use that song very specifically to overcome that. And he doesn't write anything specifically about this song, saying to sing this song to overcome this, but I think this song is one of the antidotes to doubt. Because how could you possibly doubt if you've experienced a reality like this? How could you doubt after you've seen God, after He's come into your heart and set ablaze your delusions? And this song is so magnificent in its understatement. You know, if you were to think of, if you sat down with a composer and you said, okay, now I want to write a song. And he goes, yep, I'm on board so far. And you say, and I want to write a song about God. And he says, sure, no problem. Like, we got lots of those. You know, lots of composers write lots of songs about God. And then you say, I want to write a song about God that's about coming into contact with divine experience. And he's like, okay, now we're getting fairly specific here. That's a little outside of the realm of the normal. But still the composer's like, got an idea of what you're kind of thinking. And you're like, and I want it to personify the experience of having your delusions burned away and experiencing the true grandeur of your soul. And the composer's like, yeah, got it. And he's thinking like huge crashing cymbals and a blasting brass section and a choir of thousands and 100 string instruments. And, you know, maybe like that one 1812 overture, maybe we're going to fire off a few cannons while we're at it. That's sort of what you might think. And that sometimes actually can be tremendous. I've had the great joy of hearing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and therefore that Ode to Joy at the end. And that is this enormous triumphal chorus that is very, very moving actually to hear in person. But how humble is this song? Its melody barely contains more than a handful of notes, and mostly it centers around a single pitch. And every time it wanders, it just comes right back. And even its climax is understated. Its climax barely climbs up a mid-range of any human's voice. Again, if you were to think to write a song that was to express this grandeur through a human voice, any opera writer would write it to have this huge climactic high note with the crashing orchestra and the cymbals and all that. And you can just hear Pavarotti blasting out some high note. That would be tremendous and dramatic. But that's not at all what this song is. This song is so humble. Because truth doesn't need to be yelled. Truth doesn't need to be defended. Truth simply is. That if you love your mother, you don't have to stop every single person on the sidewalk and tell them how much you love her. You just love your mother. You can convey it in a glance. You can convey it simply by the magnetic radiations of your heart. That's just what is. There's a wonderful story of St. Anthony of the Desert, who I'm sure we're all familiar with, but if you're not, I'll just briefly recapitulate his life. He was a deep mystical saint of Christ, a disciple of Christ, who lived several hundred years after Christ left the planet. And he lived in Egypt. And after spending his entire life, basically, virtually, in seclusion, I'm talking 70 years in seclusion, doing intense tapasya and in deep inner communion with Christ's consciousness, he became quite famous, actually, for being a man of God. And meanwhile, during that period of seclusion, a very serious rift began to form in the church, in the then Catholic Church. And it's called the Arian heresy because of one of the people who is advocating this new heresy, or as it became known, a heresy, but a new interpretation of the life and teachings of Jesus. And that new interpretation said that Jesus Christ was not the Son of God, meaning divine in essence, or an ambassador of God, but that Jesus was merely the Son of Man. And though that may seem like an insignificant detail to us now, this was really important, because that meant either Christ was the Son of God, and therefore divine, or he was just a guy with a nice philosophy. And we can see the implications here. Either it's just a nice way to live and be a good human being, or it's a path back to divinity. And this heresy was threatening to rip apart the church. And St. Anthony had a vision of an altar, and a donkey was trying to kick over the altar. And then one day in his meditation in his cave, some people came to him, and they tried to explain the context of this Arian heresy, and he couldn't really follow because he had been in seclusion for so many years. But then finally he understood. He said, "Oh, I understand. The donkey's trying to kick over the altar." And so he went with them down to the main capital and into a cathedral, a great temple, and there were all the big who's of the church. And they began in a ceremony of worship. And partway through, when they read in the original text, and Jesus Christ, the Son of God, half the temple outcried, "No, he's the Son of Man." And they began to argue in the middle of a Mass. And St. Anthony was appalled that they would desecrate such a sacred moment and such a sacred temple with an argument. And there he was a hermit. He was probably fairly emaciated, wearing nothing but sack clothing, disheveled perhaps, unkept because of his long years of silence and seclusion away from society. And this whole temple burst out in argument. And the story goes that he just stood. He rose. And as he rose, the entire temple fell silent, because everyone could feel this was a man who knew. And there he stood, and he ended the entire Arian heresy with 4 words: "I have seen him." But he spoke those 4 words with so much truth, with so much conviction, with so much magnetism, that no one could argue with him. Christ was the Son of God. I have seen him. And that's what this song is. This song is the melody of those 4 words. I have seen him. And think of the power that is contained within that. There was the power to hold together a church, to hold together a group of people that were otherwise divided endlessly by doubt. And what conquered that doubt? Not intellectual cleverness, not willpower, not cudgeling them with the power of your own persuasion. but direct divine contact. Direct divine contact, intuition. And that's what this song is all about. It's magnificent to think about. And it's so, like I keep saying, it's so understated. And now let's listen to the melody once. I'll play it on my cello just to highlight. I was actually amazed. I just played this on my cello a moment before we started the broadcast, and it really stunned me how simple the melody is. Without the words even, it's so humble. But let's listen to this melody and feel that this is the melody of your heart who has now known God. Just feel for a moment the open-hearted quality of this melody, its simplicity, and its complete dynamic faith in its own experience. Its self-surrender and its self-expansion. It's beautiful. I'll share just briefly. I'm not much of a music theorist, but very often in a piece of music, whatever is the tonic of the chord, the first note of a scale, has a real sense of purpose or home or self-identity. Like we could almost call it the I am of a chord. And this song barely touches on that note at all. In fact, the only time it touches that note is when it goes up an octave, which we could say very poetically is like understanding yourself from a higher level. And that the note it starts on is a very aspirational note that's saying that there's something we're seeking. I was caught up in ecstasy. And the melody always returns to that note of aspiration. It would be so easy for a composer to write, I was caught up in ecstasy, which would be moving down to the tonic, to the resolution of the chord. And you can kind of feel how there's a relaxation there, but that's not what Swami does. That's not where this piece of music moves, because it's constantly moving us upward. It's constantly drawing the heart up into a divine experience until at last he withholds that note from us until we sing, how the soul made to live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right. And on the word soul, and reclaim. We hear those tonic notes, but up an octave. And it doesn't take a music theorist to understand what the music is implying there. That the soul is your true nature, and that you can reclaim its eternal right, and that that is your destiny, and that everything else is just a pit stop along the way of divine awakening. That's what this melody is saying. And then every time it returns back to that third, which is the starting note of the song, which is, I was caught, or how the night. It's always implying this sense of upward moving aspiration. And that's even where the song ends. Can be fired, blazing with his light. It's this great note of hope that at the end of this divine experience, the singer, the saint who wrote this song, is holding out his hand in hope to all of his fellow brothers and sisters, us. So take this piece of music as a divine tractor beam to draw you in to an inner contact with God. And then allow it to transform your sense of self-identity, to reclaim your soul's eternal right, to reclaim that as being your true sense of identity. And then allow that aspiration to expand effortlessly out through your heart, to shine the light of hope on all of your brothers and sisters in God. That's what this song is saying to us. And it's a 60-second song that uses 6 different notes. But it says so much, doesn't it? So let's sing it together one more time. I invite you to sit up straight. And let's imagine that this isn't just a song that we're enjoying, but imagine that this is the spontaneous soul cry of your heart's inner experience. What would it feel like to write this piece of music spontaneously? What would it feel like if this were the only way you could express what was happening in your heart? And let's try and sing it. Let's try and tune into it as if that were true. I was caught up in ecstasy. It was a day sanctified by God. There He showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking Him should know. How the soul made to live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right. How the night born of our delusions can be fired blazing with His love. Thank you, friends. Let's try to live in this vibration of the inner awareness of God's presence. And if you ever doubt, or if you ever fear, or if you ever grieve, or suffer, or sorrow, try singing this song. Try, as it says, to fire the night of your delusions. Set it blazing with God's love, kindled by the touch of your inner contact with Him. I'll see you next week, my friends. God bless us all.